which is the Public Procurement Bill. Now, some context on the Public Procurement Bill. This bill has gone a long road. I'm not going to go through that. There's plenty of videos on the YouTube channel where Professor Kino has discussed the route that it's taken to get to this point. There is a bill. This is a bill. This is no longer a draft bill. This is a bill that has been tabled at Parliament end of June, early July. A few weeks ago, Parliament called for comments on the bill. The comments close on Monday at midday. I am aware that there are some folk that have requested for an extension to that. We did not get any feel at all from the Parliamentary Committee yesterday as to whether they're going to entertain an extension on the comments. It is going to be very, very rushed. To give you some context, the UK has had exactly the same bill that they have been discussing for well over a year in Parliament. It has just recently gone to their second house, as will happen in South Africa's instance, and we're basically are given a few weeks to comment on it, and it closes midday on Monday, the 11th of September. So there is a lot in here that will impact all procurement units. This bill will replace the triple PFA. It will replace the MFMA aspects that talk about supply chain management, and it will replace all the aspects in the PFMA that relate to SCM and procurement. I'm going to come back towards the end of the discussion on the name of the bill, but I have invited a couple of people to just join us in today's discussion and just share with us one or two points that they would like to make. And on this one, I'm going to briefly just take you through a couple of points. These are some ideas and thoughts from myself based on many discussions that we've been involved in. But please, the intention of this is that you do something. You give the Parliamentary Committee some feedback on this bill. Don't get concerned about the complexity of what's in here. Yes, it's 40-something pages, but please, if you're not in a position to give feedback on 40-something pages, don't do that. I know that there are a number of different institutions and organizations and people that will give feedback on all of these sections. That's not the focus of today. What I suggest that we do for today is just run through a couple of points that are relevant in particular to people who are working in public procurement on the ground in terms of what this particular bill is going to mean for you if it goes through, and that you seriously consider putting a response in on any aspect that we're raising today to the Portfolio Committee. You do not have to worry about style and format. There are suggestions on the YouTube channel that Professor Kino has made on how you can do that. But if you just send an email giving your name, your department, your municipality, your province, your entity that you're working for, what role you have in there, maybe you give a bit of context as to how long you've been working in public procurement, and give the clause and the detail around that clause. Even if you're not in a position to provide a recommendation, just give them feedback on what this means to you and what this may mean. Now, the bill is is half the size of the draft that Treasury issued in 2020. And so a lot of this has detail that will follow in regulations. There's not a lot of detail currently in this version of the bill. I'm going to jump through these definitions. There's lots we can talk about on the definitions. If any of the people that are with us today would like to comment on any definition, if you think it's critical and important to raise it, please do. But I'm going to just jump through this and go straight to section 2 of the bill. And you'll notice in section 2, they talk about introducing uniform Treasury norms and standards for all procuring institutions to implement their procurement systems as envisioned in 2171 and 2161. Now, for those of you that understand PFMA and MFMA, you'll notice that this is fairly new. Yes, we've always known about 2161, but to bring this in now as a object of this act is an interesting time to introduce it. And one of the concerns that's been raised, and I'm going to make a suggestion now as to what you might want to put in. One of the suggestions that's raised is that it's not very clear whether it is a standardization to introduce standard norms and standards, standardization or uniformity for all procuring institutions with respect to their procurement system. Now, just pause briefly on that point. Your procurement system, we have an incredibly diverse public sector that is doing everything from arms to electricity to water services to municipal services to social services. And I don't know, I'm concerned that this might be used as a lever to start to say, no, this is the way, this is the only way, and there is no other way. And so the suggestion that I would am making is that that maybe what needs to be here is the term appropriate, uniform and appropriate Treasury norms and standards. You might want to think about saying something along the lines of introduce uniform Treasury norms and standards as may be appropriate for procuring institutions. So I think the word appropriate is possibly missing here. And so that's the first of a couple of points that I'd like to make. If there's anyone who would like to disagree with me, please do so. I absolutely understand that it's not their intention for us to have a public sector that has got vastly different preferential procurement policies. There's over 1,000 different preferential procurement policies across the country right now. That is not necessarily what we want, but doesn't mean that everyone needs to be uniform or standardized in that respect is the question. Advocate Nsaluba?
Thank you, Sean. I think I can't agree with you more, because norms and standards can be there, but you need what in business they call fit for purpose. You have various sectors, and then they've got their own charters that define how some of the activities should be carried through. So you are very correct. It must be appropriate. So it must be fit for purpose. But it does not remove that it's important that we have norms and standards. But we will need then to see how they get customized to the various sectors. because we have never had any procurement that is jagged for jagged in any case in South Africa. So it would be new and it would not work in any case. So I agree with you.
Thank you very much. And just so everyone knows, the advocate and I did not discuss this before, but I'm suggesting that in 2.2, we request the addition of another conditionality. So 2.2 says that, let me just see if I can move this out of the way. Uniform Treasury norms and standards refer to in must, among others, and then I'm suggesting we put a conditionality in there to say, accommodate the diverse requirements of procuring institutions and be fit for purpose.
Definitely.
Something along those lines.
Definitely. That makes sense.
Thank you. Very well. That was my first big one to raise. Just quickly, for those of you that are in working with any organization that receives, if you receive funding from donors or from grants, then this is one that you might want to just comment on as well. So this act applies to all procurement carried out by procuring institutions, including procurement through donor or grant funding. Now, I know, for example, National Treasury are one of those that receive a lot of grant funding, and they do a lot of tenders. And when they do those tenders, they do not follow PFMA requirements. They follow the requirements that very often are imposed on them by the body that has given them the funding. So what I'm suggesting here is that if this is an issue for you, because remember, a lot of funding comes or grants or donations come with conditions. And what we might want to include in there for those that have an interest in this area is to maybe just put a point in there where procurement conditions are not set by the donor. My concern is that this might reduce donor funding that comes in, because often they say, hey, here it is, but please, here are some conditions in terms of how you should be spending that money. And if you want, you can put some reasonable conditions for something, if you like. All right, advocate, I think you've raised your hand again.
Yeah, yes, Sean. I think for me the issue you are raising is around the practicality, and the fitness of because you also, when you are writing legislation, you must look at whether what you intend is very practical, and just like you have said, I mean, the donor funding is always subject to the rules of who provides it. But on the other side, Sean, one of the things that we were very much alive to in government was the fact that you are funding me does not mean that you must change the terms of how I want to operate. So pulling these things together then is I think is the call for this particular clause, that it allows Africa and South Africa to be able to still remain in their lane once they are donor funded.
Yeah.
But at the same time, and the reason was very simple, Sean. You then have a person who must, if you look at strategic planning, the person must develop a plan according to the South African norms and standards. Somewhere the person must develop something else because it's needed by the donor. A person must develop reports according to South African standards. The person must again develop another thing according to another template. And it was like, how do we create sanity within the space? So I understand it from that angle. But at the same time, like you are saying, the donor funding is subject to a lot of multilateral requirements, which some of them are sacrosanct. You can't say you can't do them. But then the question is, how do we strike the middle ground then in terms of drafting?
Hello.
is the question.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Malakia, welcome.
Good morning, and thanks, Sean. I think that what you've added today, it does accommodate the donor funding. Because in most cases I've dealt with when in my previous life at South African national parks, where the donors will put their own requirements, or their own conditions. Some they'll say you need to use the bank. Sorry, I'm trying to get
one of the banks. Or
no, the not IMF.
World Bank.
World Bank, yes.
Yeah.
You need to use the World Bank procurement processes, So I think that should suffice in terms of accommodating the both South African laws as well as the donor funding. Like you've rightfully said, this might also take away, and you don't want to chase the donor funding, because sometimes it comes handy in some of the projects.
Thanks very much, Malakia. Yes, I was thinking also about how many hospitals get lots of donor funding as well to build different wings, things like that in hospitals. Yeah, sandbox. Hi, Ingrid.
Hi, Sean. Is this not a good thing to protect our local industry? Because if funding agencies are coming in and providing, I know in the electrical environments or solar panels, they could be putting in there that their foreign contractors or their foreign suppliers are given preference on these jobs because they're providing the funding. And I mean, is this not being tied in to protect our local industry?
It is, and I think that's what Advocate Nslubu was saying is there is some rationale to this. I think though that
so we basically, when we're saying that, so you basically saying the procurement conditions are not set by the donor, but we know that they all are, and so you basically saying that we have to take the donor preference into account before we take our procurement laws into account.
because
it's a very difficult thing,
yeah,
because I mean, I think this is being put in to protect our local industries, isn't it?
Yeah. But remember, you get it or you don't, right? It's if you might say, well, you can't, therefore you're not going to get the money, and so that might reduce a lot of the donations that come in. There are a lot of organizations out there, and I think Malakia just referenced that many of them prefer you to use things like World Bank procurement rules and standards when they do that, because that's the condition of the loan.
Okay. So this is basically just giving a caveat to saying that they must pay attention to the procurement bill, but obviously there could be mitigating circumstances.
Yeah. You see, this is an act level. If this goes in like this, that's it. There's no option.
Yeah.
It is any donor. The only way is this is the way, right? And they may not like it like that. Malakia?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I take it that before we even get to the procurement processes, there is some work or negotiations that are done in the background, where issues of economic challenges that are facing South Africa, like your unemployment, inequalities, and so forth, are being raised. So it depends on whoever that is negotiating to bring these issues or these challenges to the donor. That, look, we want to make sure that with the project that we want to undertake, we want to make sure that we create jobs. And we can only create jobs if we are employing the South Africans, or through, the SMME development. So as we know that the SMMEs are seen as the levers for economic growth. So we'll then, during the negotiations, upfront indicate that only suppliers that are within the South African borders will be appointed, albeit that we might follow your procurement processes, but we need to make sure that we appoint the South African companies. Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Sonele?
Yes, thanks, Sean. Thanks, colleagues. Mine is to zoom in on the reasonable procurement conditions. Let's say the drafters of the legislation, they adopt this proposal, and then now it is being implemented. And we get to now decide what is reasonable procurement conditions that are set by the donor.
Yeah.
You want to come in there, Sean, and probably give us a clue what would then constitute what is a reasonable procurement conditions, and what if we then now deemed those conditions as unreasonable? Are we then gonna revert to the bill and apply that and inform the donor that you are not going to take a condition but your money? How is it going to work?
So on the last point, that is what will happen. If they say here is a condition and the donation is on condition that you follow World Bank processes, and you say no, we do not agree with that condition, then you don't get the money. So that's an easy one because the donation is very typically on. Now, we've got some precedences in what do you call it? PAJA. Do we not have reasonableness in PAJA? Lawful, reasonable, and procedurally fair. So reasonable is a term that we've got some understanding of. One of the things that the courts have said on reasonable is the courts will never judge whether something is reasonable or not. What they will do is they'll ask someone who is a professional in that arena to ask. And so one of the ways to judge whether something is reasonable is you ask someone who is experienced or is a professional in that area. And that person would say it's reasonable. So, it would, the stupid example would be, if there's a medical procedure, you're not going to ask me as an engineer whether that medical procedure is reasonable or not. You'll ask another medical person who is maybe at more senior level to help you assess whether that. So I don't think reasonable is something which we're not familiar with, which we can't necessarily work with in procurement. Just a quick one, everybody, about the little discussion we've just had now. Remember, what's going to happen is the portfolio committee is going to sit and they're going to go through every one of the clauses in this bill. Part of why Zwanele Manye was not happy that this is so long is because it's going to take them a long time to go. Every single clause they're going to go through in the portfolio committee. If there is no one that has mentioned anything about these clauses, they have no basis then, apart from a bit of a discussion that they may have amongst themselves to figure out whether they should do anything. If there's no one who comments on this is my fear. If no one comments on these things, it's going to go through as is. If you've made a suggestion, at least this discussion will start to happen in the portfolio committee. where they'll talk about reasonable, and you'll have the twos and fro's from the different members of the portfolio committee commenting on it. So, as I said earlier, make a comment, give some context, talk about why this might be risky, and if you can, give a suggestion. They've got something to work with at least. They can in that respect. I'm just checking, is something new to add, Malakia? All right, let's move on. I don't want to. Yes, so, yes, advocate.
Two things. One of the questions that I've constantly been asking, I think I asked it even at Treasury when they were presenting the same, and I think I still need to raise it with regards to this particular clause. Remember, Africa now is consolidating its strategy. It's saying, first deal with Africa before you go anywhere. Now, the question I'm asking is, how is that initiative, which we have signed in South Africa and the other countries, across all sectors, including the legal fraternity, where procurement is, that's where this consideration is being. Now, how is that going to be possible? Okay, let me rephrase. The implications of that legal instrument that has been signed is that your procurement instruments must give substance to it. They must domesticate it, right? Now, the question is then, at what point are we domesticating that requirement? Because it allows us to transact within Africa as a house first before we go anywhere, across all sectors, which then will build Africa and the trust Africa is having on herself. Now, going to the clause that we're discussing, we're talking there on donor funding. The question is going to be, if you look at the scramble for resources in the mining space, who is the driver of donor funding? And with what I've just said now, don't you think that this clause would assist exactly the principle I've raised? Because if donor funding is coming from outside Africa, and you don't have a capability to channel it in a specific manner, I mean, the issue about renewable energy in Africa has just been raised. If you don't have a capability to channel that, such that it lives the African dream, like the clause that we have there, how else are we going to manage such? That's the question I'm having. And I'm then saying that clause will help Africa depend on herself, and the funding, which is paying for the sins, be used for the African solution. Sorry for being controversial.
Important points. I'm going to jump. There's Thandi Pinno's has joined us, and I know that she has to leave fairly quickly. Thandi, I'd invited you to just share one point or 2 points that you would like to make on the bill. Are you in a position to do that, or do you have to rush off yet?
Good morning, colleagues. Hi, Sean. I can do it now. Thank you. I just had to leave by 11:10. Thank you.
Okay. You got some time. Which was the clause?
It was section 58.
Okay. My favorite.
Section 58, I think 1V. I'm writing different things.
This is a good time to bring this one in.
58 1AV.
There it is.
And this one, Sean, it's coming from me wearing the MFMA cap now as a municipal supply chain practitioner. If you look at this section, talks about the V talks to procedures. First, is that the minister must make regulations regarding procedure for bid specification, invitation, submission, opening, evaluation, adjudicating, awarding, and cancellation of the procurement process. Firstly, the invitation. In the municipal supply chain regulation, municipalities are required to make their invitations on local newspapers. And you have iTender from CIDB, which I fought and I lost the fight to say, I don't want to advertise on newspapers because iTender from CIDB targets the people that I'm looking for. But now we know the definition of irregular expenditure. So if I'm not able to prove that I've complied with the regulation to the T, then it's a regular expenditure, but where is the value add for me in terms of that invitation? And for that to be declared by the minister, it's a bit of an issue. Even the issue around submission and opening, you have, and here's the thing about the ad. They obviously think about the first probable one incident, and then you have one organ of state that can receive up to maybe 10 bits. But on the far end, you have Department of Education that can receive 4,000 bits. So now you are telling me now the minister is going to tell me how the bits are going to be submitted and opening. The opening, remember, it's about the announcement, and some organs of state, they still have this view that you have to even announce the price. As much as we advise that it's may not practical, especially with construction where there's arithmetic errors and so forth. But for purpose of transparency, because we really want to prove that we're transparent, we feel the pressure to announce these things. Now, imagine how practical that would be for such organizations. So I think that many years ago, 2004, 2003, when MFMA came to being, we were not there yet. Our maturity level was very low. And all of that, maybe it worked. But at this present moment, I think we have matured. And therefore, these are certain things that maybe should not be at the discretion of the minister. You know, I mean, we know what happened with the PPR 2022, where a lot of things were not taken out because they were illegal, but they were taken out because it was not necessarily prerogative of the minister. You know, yes, we have Section 217 that is still there that requires how our processes and our systems should be. Therefore, I would rather be comfortable to say maybe our policy make provision for these. Because now with my experience in supply chain now, I can confidently say model policy doesn't work. Because model policy doesn't talk to me. Model policy is some umbrella that I get to be forced into that doesn't talk to my specifics. So for me, this section, I think for the word procedure, really for the minister, I think it's way too operational. Yes, the actual talk to, there needs to be a competitive bidding system, you know, that will allow for maybe a transparent and whatever process of doing bids, and then leave it there. And then even on the regulation, put it at high level and then allow organs of state to change the dynamics, because like I said, I really think that we have matured. Thanks.
Good points. Thank you. Malakia?
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Thandi. My understanding in terms of this Section 58 is that much as the bill or the act is going to refer to the minister, then the minister cannot do that in isolation. There's still going to be a consultative process that need to ensue before the minister can ratify the regulations. So which then means that if now the minister needs to write something pertaining to the procedure pertaining to bid specification, the bid invitations and so forth, that he cannot do or she cannot do in isolation. There must be that consultative process, which will include all parties concerned. That's my take.
Malakia, so that will happen, right? So there will be a regulatory process that they've got to go through, and they've got to issue drafts, and they've got to get comments and all that kind of stuff as we currently have with regulations. What I'm hearing from Thandi is the minister is going to make regulations at a procedure level for the procedure for a bid specification, the procedure for invitation, the procedure for submission, the procedure for opening, the procedure for evaluation, the procedure for adjudication. Then I mean, do we have a treasury that has done that yet? So we're putting down in this act that the minister is going to have to put these regulations together at a procedure level for these things. I don't know if we've ever had a procedure on invitation and submission. I'm just thinking of the diversity of what we've got now. I mean, submission on email, submission on tender box, submission on the different electronic platforms that we've got, the sophisticated submission processes that we've got, the multiple submission and stage processes that happen, quotations, bids, I don't know. I mean, are you comfortable that this is where we want to go, or should we not be as what Thandi is suggesting, that that maybe this procedure level should be left for the SOPs, if you like, at a at an organ of state level? Why must the minister be regulating this?
Sean, sorry for interjection. I think it depends on the hierarchy of this legislations. Like now, this will be promulgated into an act, and then
this
we'll
is primary
have
law, right?
Come again?
This is primary law. This is at a PFMA Act level. Absolutely right.
Correct. But now, I'm not sure what's going to happen with Section 76 because of the PFMA, because my understanding is that this is informed by Section 76. So I don't know if the people that were enacting this act took that into consideration, because now you cannot have two acts enjoying the same. Which one's going to take the precedence in event that the other one contradicts the other.
Interesting.
You see, so hence I was saying it depends on the level of these legislations. If minister is going
there's a trumping clause in this act.
Is it?
Yeah, that will trump it.
Sean, can I say something?
Please go ahead, Advocate, and then we'll jump to Masichaba and then Lindiwe.
In the section you were in the earlier part of the discussion, the trumping clause actually is there. I mean, the interesting thing about South African drafting processes is that when you draft anything, you say, if there's a contradiction, mine stands. Everybody's mind stands. So that has been dealt with. As for how practical it is, it's another debate. However, Tron, I want to, can you see in the case there's conflict with others, this one prevails. Everybody says this one prevails. I was also doing the same in the military. I would say mine prevails. But anyway, let's go to section 58. I just want to say, Sean, you're quite correct. We need to make sure that there are submissions. Let me assist you with this clause, and I will refer to what we did in the Military Veterans Act, which is more or less the same features as this one, because a Military Veterans Act was consolidating things that are happening across various organs of state, whether it's education, it's jobs, and everything. Now I'm sponsoring this, that what we did there was to understand the confluence of the terrain and begin then to deal with what Uthandi is saying. The minister must, in consultation with the relevant organs of state. I'm telling you, it's a bit of a tedious exercise, but it allows that no one can just write regulations without consulting. And with housing, the minister had to consult with the Minister of Housing, with education, with the Minister of Education. And we did that with our eyes open, because we were clear that you're not going to manage a cross-sectional benefit from a single-minded approach. And so you manage it through regulation. So I would sponsor just Van die Begin that the minister must, in consultation with the relevant statutory bodies and organs of state, make regulations. Then it applies to all of them. Now, coming to what Utandi is raising, you're very correct. This might have never happened. But allow me now to wear my hat as a regulator of private institutions, which I happen to be one at some point. You see, when you are regulating private education provisioning, you have to regulate how to deal with first application, second application, third application by way of regulations. But it was norms and standards. It was norms and standards.
Yeah.
But then the nuances, you would then manage them, whether is what you call now SOPs. But during our time, that was not there. We used to call them gazettes. You would gazette it, because remember, things change with time. So you don't want your regulations to be changing every now and again, but you would then gazette whatever then it is that is at a lower level. So I understand what you're saying. Some of these things can be managed at SOP level, but I think then you should be talking about norms and standards that inform the process, not the actual procedure. Right? Like for example, if you go to the military, you would find that there will be guidelines that informs how you must do this, but the Air Force will apply those differently, probably from the Navy or from. So you allow the norms and standards for development, but then the actual nuances will be managed in that particular place through the SOPs. So I agree with you. It cannot be like that. We need to change it.
Thank you.
But I want us to put that clause that it must be in consultation with the relevant organs of state at any of these, from A to Z of these regulations, if really we want to make sure that this works.
Got it. Masachaba, welcome.
Thank you, Sean. And I think the previous speakers has covered quite. I understand where other speaker comes from, but you know, the challenge is that, and I think you asked a lot of questions to say, can we do that? We were confronted with a question from some of the law enforcement agencies when they were making some investigations, and they would see that the process was kind of manipulated at a tender box procedure, as an example. But there is no act that then tells you where exactly, or if not, whether you can accept vets that are not in the tender box, because we also have processes where you can post them and someone can go and collect. But in terms of what happens when they collect, how many of them are there to ensure that the process doesn't get to be manipulated? Yeah. It's things that organs of state were expected to put in their policies and procedures, and they were not necessarily prescribed by any act or regulations. And because of that, it was very difficult, although wrong things happened after that, it was very difficult for them to come up with a crime that has been committed, because we all know that a PFMA non-compliance with the recent court cases has now been criminalized. But because it's not in the PFMA and it is not in the regulations, it was difficult for us to say that, yes, this law has been broken, because organs of state can decide what they put in their policies, in their standard operating procedures that suits them. And I think perhaps that's what maybe kind of prompted this issue. And I agree with the other colleagues who have spoken before, you know, because of many acts, you know, we've got too many acts in the space, but unfortunately wrong things are happening, and we still find gaps in our laws. And where those gaps, we find those gaps, and we find that those that are doing wrong things, they are finding loopholes into the systems. We've got to introduce something that carries weight which when they had not done it, we can be able to charge them. So it is those dilemmas, because even for invitation, even for the quotations, they can decide to invite them anyhow, whether they use computer system, whether they use a manual system of people that can easily collude among each other, and then you get the highest quote, which does not align to the market prices, but you can prove that, no, I followed your process as treasury as you prescribed me. So the fact that someone has charged me for a bottle of water 1,000 rands, the other quotes were charging me 2,000 and 3,000 rands, and as a result, this was my cheapest one. I know we've got processes in terms of the demand management where people need to find the market prices and everything, but they are not doing that. And unfortunately, those are good practices. And we're at this point where you want to implement consequences and you want to charge. The policies of the institution do not help you much, because you need to find a criminal element. They can only go as far as when you implement consequences with your employees within on the labor relations. But to go outside and start getting the money and starting to lock the people behind bars, you need to prove that there is a law that has been broken. And I think maybe this is coming there. I agree that we need to tread carefully based on what has happened in the triple PR and make sure that at least we're not overstepping. But I think that is something that has been done. I also agree on all these issues that we don't seem to have the capacity to to do all these things, including the vetting, of SCM officials. It's as SSA, it can't cope with the load that it has, excluding these additional people that we have. So, but I also agree when advocate says, you know what, these regulations will come in and the minister will do them from time to time. But my question is going to be, if we implement some and we don't implement some, what legal implication is this going to have on us? Can we choose that we, out of this law, we defer other ones, or we don't defer and we start with other ones? And I know it's a question that came when AG was looking at its extended powers, because they were looking at 3 areas and they realized that they don't have the capacity to deal with all the 3 areas. And they went and got a legal, is it a legal opinion or legal whatever, from the council in terms of you not implementing the law that you have made in totality. Are you not going to be caught wanting if someone takes you on? Because why would I comply with Section 5 and not comply with Section 58? It's your own law. So you decide what must I comply with, what I may not comply with. That suits you and your maturity and readiness. And I think even with these regulations, if they ever signed as law, we will need to look intrinsically as treasuries and say, do we have capacity? Which of the laws can we say we can defer for later, and which ones can we start with now? And what is the implication in the instance where we will be taking on in terms of not? I think that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Masachava. Thank you. I'm going to ask Lindiwe to come in. I don't know if she is still with us. I think she had an 11 o'clock meeting.
No, I'm still here, Sean.
Hi, do you want to add a comment, Lindiwe?
Yes, I want to comment on section 58 as raised by advocate and Thandi. So the first comment is that I think what the concern of advocate in terms of in consultation with, I think is covered, advocate, if I'm not mistaken, under 58.2. 58.2, I think it covers your concern. But the other comment that I wanted to make sure was that for me, this is one section that yesterday in our session, we were supposed to deliberate on. Unfortunately, we did not have sufficient time because we were trying to focus on the legislative mandate of the NRF, as opposed to looking at all the other sections. So like my boss will say, this is section 58. If you look at some of the things that they say the minister is going to regulate, it's again where National Treasury is trying to micromanage organs of state, because if you look at some of the things that they are saying the minister must regulate, it's actually, for me, the work of the accounting officer or accounting authority. For example, if you look at a Roman figure, let me see, 3, 4, 5, 6, Roman figure 6, 58.1A6, Roman figure 6, the setting of market-related prices ceilings for procurement. How is the minister going to do this? How many commodities do we have? There's no way that the minister will be able to do this, but this is something that it can be left to individual organs of state. So it's a pity that yesterday we did not have time to go through this, but some of the regulations that are stated here, in my view, it shouldn't be what the minister should be doing. I hear 58.2 that in consultation with, but really we need to give power and authority to the accounting officers or accounting authorities. Otherwise, they will just be, post office. They'll just sit and not do anything. They won't be able to have an impact on this. I understand that their role is oversight and all that, but surely some of these things that the minister must regulate, it is actually the work of individual state-owned entities, including the one that Thandi has read. Procedures for bid specification, invitation, those are operational. How is the minister going to do this? I'm not sure. But then, thank you, Sean. That is my comments on 58.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Lungisi.
Sorry, Sean.
Yes, go ahead.
Just before Lindiwe leaves, I have a problem with that section. If you listen to what I've just said, procurement is cross-sectional, right? By this very nature, you're not going to deal with one minister. I've just told you how we crafted the military veterans bill. So you can't talk about one minister. You talk about the executive authorities, the appropriate executive authorities. Otherwise, it allows you to do due diligence and appreciation which constitutional organizations are affected by this particular clause. And then you consult them, not just one minister. So I find a problem with that. It does not solve the problem.
Okay.
It doesn't.
Got you.
It's a convenience clause that's always there to cover for all the folliness. And you can't afford that for procurement.
Thank you. Let's just ask Lungisi to come in quickly, and then Sanele.
But if he says relevant minister, okay.
It's relevant minister, not relevant executive authorities. It's only one minister. And this struggles across various organs of state with various ministers, not one minister.
Got you.
Sorry,
Thank you so
Sean.
much.
Can I check? Sorry, Sean, I'm sorry to do this. Can I check this with the advocate? My understanding, advocate, if they say consult with the relevant minister, for example, if it's something which is, if it's the regulation which is innovation and science related, then it will be our minister, for example. If it's something which is environmental related, it will be the Minister of Environmental Affairs, and so on and so on.
Hold it there.
Yes.
There will never be any regulation that talks with innovation. It does not talk about BEE. Just listen to what I've said. Already I'm saying to you, you will never have any discussion on any regulation without the commission. The commission is in another ministry. So this actually, it actually limits and allows for a situation where the actual appreciation of which critical organs of state are affected by this. Because here you run for science and innovation, but that's not where the issues are. The issue about BEE across all sectors is not with science and technology. It is not with energy. It is with the energy, including defense, including BEE, the BEE Commission. This is what I'm raising. And the moment we lose it here, we'll never get it right. I must say, it's very strenuous. But the moment you do it, you've locked a number of things.
Okay, okay. Thanks. Quick one from Lovisi. I see you have unmuted.
All right, thank you so much, Sean, and then good morning to the colleagues. For me, I concur with Tandi's comment. I think it's one comment that I also raised yesterday around the minister having so much power to regulate the issue of the bid specification and the processes thereon. Because if you are talking about the procedure, we are instructing on how you should execute each activity of a business. And I don't think at that level of a ministry, we should be having in an act something that is going to be instructing me how I should be doing that. I'm also cross-referencing this regulation or this part of 58.1. As a department, we sort of an implementing agent as per section 238 of the Constitution. So if an executive authority of that other department delegates a certain function or power to us as Department of Public Works to procure or to do a lease agreement or to build a school or a hospital, what exactly are they delegating to us? Because the minister, as per this act or as per the bill now, holds all the power. So the ministers in other organs of state or MSCs as per the provinces, they do not have the power. For me, it stifles the fluidity, and it's not supposed to be at a ministerial level where a procedure is dictated upon. So for me, I think the wording needs to be changed there so that it doesn't create that bottleneck which I see it's creating at the moment. Thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you. So Nele, come in, and then we'll move on to the next point.
Thanks, Sean. You know, it's very interesting. The conversation today, it's very interesting, and I highly appreciate it. And it does paint a picture that this bill has missed a lot of, the reality.
Yeah.
Why I'm saying that is that, the discussion that we are having from all the colleagues that have contributed, it tells you that we already have intellectuals in public procurement space, from the lower ranks to the higher ranks to the private sector to the consulting space. We just had the HOD from Free State now putting a very valid points at a very interesting or isolated space, which is procurement. And it's very encouraging to see that. Now, this is also what has been missed by the drafters of this bill, because they didn't invest in professionalizing SCM when time was in their side. Now, to compensate that gap, they want to introduce the regulations like 58.1A4 and 5, which then tells you that we don't trust you that you can do something that is right. We will then hold you by the hand at a very higher level of a point of a legislation. And I agree with the colleagues that this shouldn't be here. This shouldn't be here if National Treasury has invested time and resources to make sure that the issue of professionalizing public procurement has been dealt with. You would have people who already understand that this is how we need to go, and these are the principles that we fall under as the public procurement professionals, and this is what we need to follow. Instead of being, handheld by the legislation itself, but us as the practitioners, we already know what to do. So there should be really less need for, this overreaching legislation to overprescribe some of the things because there's a fear of the unknown by the side of the minister or the side of treasury to say maybe the capacity that we have on the ground will not do this, or when they craft policies, they will intentionally exclude some of the things. There's another point that I wanted just to throw in, but another point is there's a point that was raised by Sister Lindy, the point of dealing with the issue of market research, setting of a market-related prices, which is on 115. And this point itself is not, I would say, this is impractical. Yeah, if you are going to put this either on the bill or in the regulations, you will never win, because here you are talking about a dynamic environment, a serious moving target, and today yesterday night petrol skyrocketed, our diesel prices increased by 2 rand something, and what happens to this clause now in our future procurement between this period of yesterday night and until the diesel drop? What happens? It tells you that we shouldn't be at this level now. We should have these guiding document. Yes, we don't shy away from that, but there's a long-term investment that is being ignored by National Treasury and the national legislature, I would say Parliament. The direct investment of creating a professional board, which is not even covered in this legislation. Maybe the understanding that they will cover it in a separate legislation for it maybe to get enough attention, I don't know. But it has a direct consequence to what is on this document today, because the way the document is crafted based on experience of what is happening on the ground. And what is happening on the ground, obviously, we can tell you that it's not a good sign. It's not something that most of the institutions should be proud of. You still have very few institutions that are following the right processes and be able to deliver the right service delivery. But it is a result of this ignored direct investment to capacity building on the public procurement practitioners. So there are also points that one has made, but I think let me stop there because this is one of the points. But I'll come back, Sean.
Thandi, I give you the last word on this one, and then we're going to move on to the next point.
Thanks, Sean. Sanele is raising something very critical, which is a conversation I was having with the Tshwane University of Technology in the advisory board, Sean. And we were having a conversation about the public procurement qualifications. And my question was, I was actually saying a CA can work in both public and private sector. You know, there's no instruction note that says when you purchase an asset, you must debit asset and credit your bank account. No, they left it to institutions of higher learning to provide that knowledge. But now with procurement, we also want to legislate what's supposed to be in education. And that's why now public procurement, it gets to be seen as something completely different. You know, as Sanele is talking about even professional body, that professional, once we talk about digging deep into professionalizing, we will get to understand that certain things, the reason why they are putting them here is because we don't want to face the fact that we put people who do not have the right competencies in supply chain. Therefore, we want to make them competent through legislation. And the danger is that any non-compliance is irregular expenditure. You know, so I think also as we put this thing, let's remember that there's something that the school's supposed to teach someone, whereby when you come in, you have a good understanding of what is basic procurement, and then everything else can be legislated. Thank you.
Thandi, just to close off on this one.
Sean, can I say something? 2 things, just a quick one.
Yes.
2 things, Sean. When you write any piece of legislation, you have the SACE process. It's a requirement. I'm wondering how this particular legislation passed that process. Precisely because what Sanele is raising is part of that impact assessment, because you need to look at posted fit, speaking the military language, but you look at the impact of the legislation on human resource, on technology, on infrastructure, on, like it's posted fit. And that then begins to make you check, one, whether in the legislation itself, you've then covered for those resource constraints, because they cannot be somewhere assigned. They must be in the legislation. The establishment of a professional capability is supposed to be in the legislation, because when you are doing the impact assessment, you are doing the impact assessment of the legislation. Secondly, I'm wondering what would have been the legal opinion of especially this particular section that we are in. Because remember, before this is supposed to be in Parliament, our own state attorney's office is supposed to have made its own position regarding the constitutionality of each clause. And I'm looking at what we're debating on and remembering what was the issue around the legislation that we had in terms of them now delving into the capability of other organs of state. So I just wanted to raise those. And lastly, there was an issue that was raised by Ulindiwe. In drafting, you are allowed to, like you might have seen in POPIA, you are allowed to actually indicate that the particular sections the effectiveness will be according to the promulgations at any point. So you are allowed to promulgate this part and leave this part and implement this regulation, but you need to be very much nuanced when you develop your legislation, such that the transitional clause at the back allows for whatever you want to do, but you are allowed to do that. But at the center of it, the analysis of the resource requirements of any legislation in the cabinet memo, which then allows that particular legislation or that particular bill to pass, is what I'm questioning here in the light of all the issues that we've made and the readiness of the system to be able to implement. Because the moment you talk about readiness, you'll begin to say, is this appropriately located here constitutionally and even resource-wise? And you are able to move things to where they belong. Thank you, Sean.
Well, we'll come back to readiness. Folk, please don't expect me to get these messages across to Parliament. Henry and I will make our submission. It'll be one submission. Please write and make sure that Parliament hears your views. And if they hear 50 views on a section, they'll take note on it. I'm jumping to 17, but I'm not going to get into too much of the detail here. There's a lot on 17. A lot of this is going to come back from a regulation perspective. You would have maybe seen some of the press news yesterday. Willie Matibula said that the 80-20, 90-10's gone, and the details will come in regulation. So let's not get into that now. There are three things that I suggest you maybe focus on. One is, if you support the idea of a set aside as a mechanism or a measure to achieve preference, if you support that, say so. Tell the parliamentary committee that this is a good measure. I believe it is. Let's tell them and make sure that they do that. There's a section in here, C4, to advance transformation, beneficiation, industrialization, innovation, creation of jobs. Look at this one and maybe add 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 different aspects that you think might be important to include in here. For example, the one thing that they haven't got in here is small businesses. There are others, but you might want to do that as well. Anyone that is importing goods, because it's just not allowed locally. I mean, just be careful about this particular one. To balance the economic impacts of imported goods or services, understand why that phrase is there, but this requires you to get an exemption from the minister at a procuring institution level if you want to import goods or services. I'm not sure that is necessarily the right thing to do. So just 2 points on this one, and let me just check if there are any comments on these. Okay, if not, let's jump to 18. And we've got to look now at 18 and 8 in the context of 58 that we've just discussed, okay? Now, 8 says the minister must prescribe a procurement system for procuring institutions. Wherever you see prescribe, it means by regulation. The minister must prescribe a procurement system for procuring institutions. Now, if we go to 8, 8 is welcome. It says a procuring institution must develop and implement an effective and efficient procurement system as envisaged in section 18. I mean, this seems right. Develop and implement an effective, efficient procurement system as envisioned in section 16. We've all had, and we all understand the notion of a policy. Frankly, if we look at the clause we discussed just now, 58, that is going to regulate the procedures, that the minister is going to prescribe by regulation the system, what is left for you? Is there anything you need to do? I think not.
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing, Sean, nothing. And my apologies to just button like this. For an example, we work in different environments. You see in 18.1c, the method for disposal and letting of assets. In my institution, I do not understand how that is going to be practically be implemented if you're going to put a regulation, because I work in an environment where there are different dynamics that exist in the space. So if you have an act that prescribes the methods, there are different methods that you'll be talking about, right? And for each and every method, let's take for an example, the 4 methods that we are likely to use whenever we're doing a disposal of immovable asset.
Yeah.
I do not expect the minister to prescribe the method that I'm going to be utilizing for that. Hence, I said it earlier on, the prescriptive word and the power that he has to go into the finer details of how these methods, all of them, should be applied. It creates a problem for me. It stifles the process in terms of the fluidity of the process now. I feel that we are just being bottled by the act into something that is going to become unworkable. I'm not being a pessimist, but the way it's crafted at the moment, I'm not too sure if it's going to capture the way in which we do things in terms of asset disposal, whether movable or immovable asset. If I'm disposing a computer, I go to a school or an NGO, I'm disposing an asset. Is the minister going to prescribe to me that if I'm going to, how do I identify the schools that are going to be disposing this asset to? He must come up with a method on how am I going to be doing that. Is he going to say to me, look at the proximity, look at the profile of the kids, look at the place where the school is placed? I do not understand that an act can do that for me, but it goes back to what Sanele was saying, that I am the one who does the work. I fully understand the environment within which I operate. Therefore, I must be given a space for me to exercise my market intelligence of how I deal with some of the aspects that are related to my field as an SCM practitioner. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Thanks. Before I ask Masi Chaba and Sanele to come in, let me just put a suggestion on what I think could change here. I think that what's missing here is the word framework. If you all think about section 217, 2 and 3, it already introduces in 217, 2 and 3 the idea of a framework, and the minister prescribes the framework and you develop the policy. It doesn't mention framework here, it says the system. And you all know the system is the system, it's the complete system, it's the procedures, it's the structures, it's who does what technology is used. I think that the word framework is missing here. Let's go to Masi Chaba and then we'll go to Sanele. Hi, Mr. Chaba.
I think, Sean, you covered me. Hi, Sean. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, I think you covered me quite. But let me just comment that really I'm just attending this platform not as an HUD, but as a SCM and finance professional.
Thank you.
And who's got a duty to network with others and hear out. So it's only on that basis. But you covered me quite. And maybe I would say, because when you look at this one, for example, there is already that framework on the disposal and letting of assets. Because when you look at the old regulations, there was nothing about thresholds in terms of the revenue generating processes we want to take. But they had already been introduced for the first time with that process. And I think maybe the word framework might have given a better clarity so that it proves that the minister is not gonna get buckled up into our operations, but it's just gonna set up the parameters. But I agree that we cannot assume if that word is not there, and perhaps needs to be put so that we can also understand the context which is made. One look at E is procurement thresholds. It's already things which we have in the system and which we are able to use them and make set of choices within that framework in terms of the decisions we need to make, whether we are disposing assets and whether we are procuring. But we are able to make set of choices ourselves without being micromanaged by a piece of legislation within the framework given. And I think maybe if that word can be put, then it will be clearer. The other thing that we see other institutions doing, especially when you look at the standards of accounting, they normally package as part of these new regulations some form of examples, because without that set of examples, words you don't know and extent to which these things are going to be done. And maybe if we had packaged some sort of an annexes so that we get to see to what level will the minister be introducing things, and to what level will the accounting officers and professionals still make their own choices, that would have assisted. But we saw that the capacities we have, the FAQ follows the regulations, which then makes it difficult for people to understand the spirit in which this act is being done, because that spirit can only be interpreted by putting in FAQ examples and implementation examples and guidances in space. And maybe that's what also needs to happen before this needs to be signed to an act, because we're all sitting here having different interpretations of what it means. And if it gets signed into law with that, there's going to be a crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Please encourage your institutions to provide some comments on this one. Let's jump to Sanele.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks to the HOD. Sorry. Sorry to our colleague, Masi Chaba. I have a very, very unfriendly view
That's
of
fine.
18.1E. I think there's a red flag there, Sean.
Yeah.
I've raised this before. I think
Yeah.
you've heard you've heard my reservation around it. That if you are going to prescribe the procurement threshold by way of regulations, there's no case law needed on that. You already have a literature in front of you of the the municipal SCM regulations, which are stifling the much needed service delivery to the community because of the threshold, or procurement threshold that was set back in 2005. It hasn't been changed. Anything that you want to do that seeks to be above 200,000, you need to go out on a public tender. I mean, 200,000, Sean. I mean, those of us who also go on Twitter, you see now the bill of the restaurant for some of the people is always above 200,000 when they're just sitting and enjoying themselves. So you can see the value of the rent is not at all in those parameters anymore. There's been a significant shift. And if we are going to set the threshold using the regulations, we are still going to have a serious blockage of service delivery and a delay, for that matter, of the much needed service delivery to the public, and the more like an increase of irregular expenditure, because now and then this gets to be transgressed for things to be done. My view on this one is simple. Remove subsection E and make it a matter of instruction.
Yeah.
Make it a matter of instruction like it is in the PFMA space. You know, I won't count how many times the PFMA procurement threshold have been amended. 2005, 7, 17, 81. They've been amended as and when the economic climate shifts. Now, one of the things that I think the drafters of this document must do is to go back and revisit that history, not necessarily to regulate everything, but to try and a lot of flexibility around the issue so that when we procure, we try and create that level of flexibility in the process and in the system. Let me stop there for now, Sean.
Thank you. Jump to Lindiwe and then Lindiwe.
Hi, Sean. I just want to talk to the one of the 18.6b, the supplier database, maybe just to provide some feedback to the colleagues following our extensive discussions yesterday around this matter, was that it is a problem for us who are procuring high-tech commodities, and also for us who are procuring from international suppliers, that it shouldn't be mandatory or compulsory that we must only procure from suppliers who are registered in the database, because of the colleagues who are involved in using the CSD on a daily basis. It's not an efficient and effective database, because it's just a list of suppliers. And then other than that, it's not giving you as a practitioner other things that, for example, yesterday one of the colleagues raised the issue of the SBD forms. You still have to do those things outside of the database and all that. And I think the other issue that was raised around the supplier database is the fact that, you know, it's a self-registration database. So a person can register for commodities that they don't provide. And then when you source directly from the database and you don't do your market analysis first to check who are the prospective bidders, you realize that you send us the RFQ to 30, and then from that 30, only 3 or 4 will respond. So our recommendation was that, yes, we agree, we can still use the suppliers registered on the database, but the database, the CSD, it needs to be enhanced. It needs to be improved with a couple of things, so that when you use it, you know that it's an effective and efficient tool. But as is now, it's just a glorified list of suppliers. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. We're going to ask Henry just to talk about the IT aspect shortly. I think Advocate Nsaluba and then Malakia.
Thank you, thank you, Sean. I hope I'm audible.
Yes,
Sean, let me say this. 18.6 is absolutely necessary. Remember, the legislation is an end state. We really need to have a place where we can be able to know what's happening. You see the same thing that we've been struggling with CETA should not be the case if we had a system and someone mandated to deal with that system. We really need a one-stop shop. So the question of whether then how they get there is a secondary question, but we need that. The second thing. So again, John, that posted fit I was talking about is about then how then they enable all these sections, but it is absolutely needed. From the angle of Africa, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, we need that from this room of Africa, because we need even an African one where you are able to source that then we can have the benefit of economies of scale for the products that we're procuring. I want to go back, Sean, to this section 18. And my question now is a simple one. You had section 18, we have section 58, we have section 8. And all these, for me, are dealing with the same thing. What we used to say to colleagues when they call us for drafting is this, which is evident here. You don't regulate contradictions. You don't solve a contradiction by regulating it. If you look at what we have here, I don't want to repeat the constitutionality lever, how this could have passed that. You see things that are at various levels. And it is very evident that the absence of a white paper before a bill is really visible here. Because there are things that would have gone to a green paper. There are things that would have been elevated into a white paper, and then those things would have been part of the bill. The absence of that process to us who are policy experts is glaring here, that everything is thrown into one place, and these things, some of them don't really belong here. And I'm saying, Sean, it is important. The last thing I want to ask from you is probably to assist the process. It would help to have a format that would assist the colleagues in terms of supplying the inputs. The reason I'm saying formats, Sean, besides the military training that are there in terms of dealing with comments, it allows everybody to uniformly respond. We really need to respond to all this so that the portfolio committee of finance
Okay, I think we got, yeah. Thanks. I think your line is going there, Advocate.
Yes, Advocate, you're still audible.
Oh, okay. Let me remove the other thing. I'm saying, Sean, if you could assist with a template, and I know you are good at that, which captures the issues you were raising. There were very important pointers you were raising, and if it's constructed the military way of dealing with comments, where if you don't have a comment, you say you have the section and you say none, it will make it possible for us to have covered everything. And truly, Sean, if we don't raise this, we have ourselves to blame. And the portfolio committee must be guided by us. And I know I'm saying this because across the people that are here, you have people in the energy sector, in the mining sector, in the security sector, and across all sectors. And we must take it upon ourselves to define and actually to make sure that this particular piece of legislation, which is far from being a legislation, is sifted such that what belongs to the white paper lands in a legislation, and what does not belong there goes into an SOP. And then my last input, As I was listening and reading this, if I can take, for example, allow me to go to the legislation that I'm passionate about, for PIA. You would find that at the end, we have indicated the pieces of legislation that are either called to non-existence or amended. I'm interested in knowing which pieces of legislation have been identified here, because what you find here is a confluence of a number of things that belong somewhere, some in the PFMA, others in other pieces of legislation. As to whether all those pieces have adequately been covered in terms of the relevant amendments is still another question.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Advocate, I think that you would have a role to make a submission next week. And why don't you just apply and just give some perspectives on the white paper, green paper aspect. I think that would be useful for that committee. Let's jump to Malakia, and then we go.
Thanks, Sean. I just want to take you back to the earlier point which was raised by Sanelo on 18.1E. Now, if we were to go with the view that this E need to be deleted, then we need also to look at section 7, 18.7, especially the latter part of that section, because it reads as a procuring institution may not split procurement or use different procurement method to avoid the prescribed threshold. So if the threshold is something that we are saying here that the minister must not prescribe, then we need also to come up with something that either takes out the section 7 in its totality, or just the latter part there, which states the prescribed threshold.
Good catch. Thank you.
And then my point, Sean, was that I want to raise was on the section 18.2A, the types of procurement method to be prescribed must include but are not limited to transversal term contracting. While one appreciates the fact that there is a value proposition in terms of transversal term contracting, especially in terms of the economies of scale. But we have seen that it creates or stifles the service delivery in a sense that, you know, when National Treasury awards, for instance, you find that it awards one item to a particular supplier who happens to be in KZN. And I'm referring here to a diesel contract. And you find that that service provider is not interested to come to Johannesburg for 20 liters only. So I think prescribing also the transversal term contracting, maybe this must be left to the provinces, you know. I don't know how, but I don't think really at treasury level, it's something that the minister really need to enforce, or it must be regulated in such a way that it becomes a must for the for the procuring institutions to participate in the transversal contract.
Thanks, Mike. Let's jump to Mlungisi.
Thank you, Sean.
Go ahead,
am I
we can hear
audible?
you. Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, Sean, my contribution is on 82A, part 3, 82A. That one, a procuring institution may.
Yes.
Yeah, that is talking about making a procurement decision. And if you are taking a decision made in respect of the implementation of public procurement, which will then include invitations to tender and adjudication or any other, then we are moving towards a partial space. So in reviewing your own decision as an organ of state, you are not allowed to do that. You then have to go to court to review that decision. We've got a case law around that. Maybe the one that comes to mind is your JK structures versus the city of Cape Town. So I'm not too sure whether my understanding is out of 10, but if it means reviewing your own decision as it relates to the implementation of a public procurement system or process, then an organ of state shouldn't have an opportunity to do those things that are cited there. That was one of my other contributions, because I can see time is running. I had another contribution on under 9.1. 9.1, there is a section where they are talking about a bidder or a supplier, right, complying with the prescribed code of conduct. A bidder or a supplier complying with the code of conduct, they are not party to any code of conduct that regulates our performance as public officials. All that they have to comply with are the laws that talks about how to be ethical and all of those things. But reducing a bidder or a supplier to comply with a code of conduct, I think that is out of place for me. And as you go down now under section 2, when they're talking about the contravention, the bidder or a supplier is no longer mentioned. They're only talking about us, accounting officers, and all the people that are employed by the state, but not the bidder or a supplier. Those were my contributions, Sean. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Good contributions. Thank you. Let's jump, if I can. I just want to quickly, 2 more things to cover, and the first of the 2 is going to be 18.3. Now, currently what it says, and these are my recommendations. Currently what it says is that the procurement system referred to in this, the procurement system must include the following matters. The ones I want to pick out is budgeting, contract management, logistics management, and asset management. These are new relative to MFMA and PFMA 16A. They did creep into versions of one of the infrastructure. I forget, one of the infrastructure documents that came out did bring this in. But I'm just cautioning you that I don't know if the procurement unit should get involved in managing contracts and managing logistics and managing assets. Managing assets is a very different discipline to procurement. Managing contracts is typically line. I don't know if these are right and to include these. Any comments? Hi, Elizabeth. Let's jump to Elizabeth and we'll go to Sanele. Hi, Elizabeth, you can unmute. There we are.
Thank you so much, Sean. Good morning, colleagues. I think this is an abstract from one of the, some of the information contained in paragraph 3 is an abstract from one of the circulars that were once issued by Treasury regarding setting up of a supply chain management unit. So a supply chain management unit will have all the components of supply chain, starting from demand acquisition, logistics, and contract management, and all those things. So I think they used that. So in other words, the bill will not only be looking at acquisition management aspect of supply chain management, but the component will also include all the other components of supply chain and not only acquisition management. Because some of the issues raised there, they are components that falls currently within the supply chain management unit, and not necessarily only the procurement unit, which is acquisition management.
Are you responsible for asset management in your unit?
No, we have an asset management component, which does not necessarily fall within the supply chain management unit, but it falls within the Chief Directorate Supply Chain Management and Supply Chain and Asset Management. Yeah. That's how we are structured in our department. We fall within the same Chief Directorate, but not within the same directorate.
Got you.
But all the other components, which is logistics and contract management, falls within supply chain management. And I sort of agree when we talk about contract management, because we end up not knowing what should be the role of a project manager when it relates to contract management, and what should be the role of supply chain management in contract management. Because sometimes you are expected as supply chain officials who are in contract management to perform functions that, in my view, are supposed to be performed by project managers, the owners of the projects, and not necessarily someone who's based in contract management. Thanks.
Thank you. It's Sanea, did you want to say something? And then Magisi?
Thanks, Sean. One of the funny duties of SCM professionals in contract management is to remind the contract owners that their contract is coming to an end. One of the duties I've never understood, because I mean that's your contract. You ought to know it's coming to an end. So that's why I think contract management is somehow not necessarily finding a link with us. Besides the small part of administration that we do. I do think that this goes back to the issue of conceptualization of both procurement and supply chain management. So I think the elements of supply chain management, if you recall, Sean, the first version of the public procurement bill, the earlier one, it was a public procurement bill, and if you read through it, and then all of a sudden it then introduced supply chain management.
Yes.
And just in the middle of nowhere, there was supply chain management, and if you read and trying to understand how the supply chain in that document was introduced and fitting in, it was just hanging in the air. It didn't have any direct link of the document. And one of the comments I've made there is we need to decide first what process or what concepts are we following. Because we cannot follow both. If we just follow the supply chain, we need to decide on that. However, the supply chain concept is really not fitting of what we are doing as government. The procurement part is fitting of what we are doing as government, because you'll know that ours is mostly the chunk of what you do is mostly on procuring. So one of the comments also that I made, I think on that section that you were highlighting, Sean, I think there's a duplication there. If you look at demand management and the planning, my view is yes, budget, planning and budgeting. I think if you look at that, there's demand management, there's procurement planning, and budgeting, which I think you rightfully scratched out. Demand management in its current form, as much as it has not been currently properly implemented by a majority of the institutions, it covers the procurement planning in its function. So if we were to do proper demand management, you'll not have to have a unit called procurement planning and budgeting. And one of the things which I think one of the comments I think one has made was the comment that I indicated earlier, that the establishment of procurement units should be clearly spelled out in the legislation. If you look at this section, I think it's chapter 2. Yes, it's chapter 2, the establishment of public procurement office. Okay, I think that's not the one. Public procurement units.
Yes.
Yes. If we look at that, I think we should be in a position of becoming more clearer there to say that office should be established either under the office of the accounting officer and have the direct supervision on the basis that obviously the accounting officers actually the one that's affected the most by the end products of this office. Now, I have made those comments, and I think if we are continuing to be silent on that, we'll continue to be established under the office of the CFO, and we feel isolated every time, and where we have to implement. That is when, if that office is established under the office of the accounting officer, that is when now it may actually be reasonable to take over these many functions of your contract management, logistics, and so on, asset management, because it will be now a bigger unit within the institution, accounting direct to the accounting officer. And also, why I made those comments, I also touched on the issue of the public procurement office, the first one, which is on chapter 2. The establishment of the public procurement office. Why I touched on this was also the issue that was made by the definitions. The definitions, it's only say the instruction notes must be issued by the public procurement office. So if you look at the definitions in chapter 1, section 1, and you look at the instructions, it then begs a question. Is either I'm not reading this correctly, or the provincial treasuries will not have powers to issue instructions. But then in the same document, it says the functions of the provincial treasury is to issue binding instructions at a provincial level. So then this definition, who does it apply to? So I also had a view, obviously, that this office, the public procurement office, by the way, it should be established at the provincial level to mirror what the public procurement office will be doing at national level. Because currently we have provincial supply chain management in provincial treasuries that are dealing with the support of the delegated institutions like your provincial department entities and the delegated municipalities. They are in a way providing the same service that is being provided by the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer. And that office is only triggered if this provincial supply chain management is unable to resolve that particular issue. So my view on this is that this office anyway must be developed, must be established at a provincial level to be able to deal with those matters. And short, because of time, I want to also put this point forward. The issue of establishing the the tribunals, the establishment of tribunals. I have an interest in this one because I've actually worked in this office in a very short space of time, and I get to understand how it functions. I also think, okay, firstly, it will be a long fight if you would say this office shouldn't be under the supervision of the political head, or it shouldn't enjoy political oversight because of what they say it should be independent. If you look at 32A, it then tells you that the tribunal, if it's accountable to the political head, or if it enjoys the appointment of the political head, it will always be questionable in terms of their independence. And also, the adjudication of matters. I don't think the current proposal or the current structure proposed by the bill will be sufficient or will be able to deal with the matters. You know, if you look at the institutions, we calculate up to 800 institutions, procuring institutions. And that will result to almost 2 million procurement or 2 million transactions. And now the issue that we would have, they are not open to the hecticness or the volatility of the procurement in the municipal space. Every tender there, like I would say, more than 50% of the tenders there are always sent for the tribunal always sent for appeal. And those are the people at the cold face of service delivery. And I don't see it working. And I think there should be consideration at that level to say the tribunals will also be established at the provincial level, working hand in hand with the PPO at the provincial level. That's my view on the other views.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
In the interest of time, let me stop there.
Good one. Thank you. Thank you. Lundisi, and then we're going to jump to Henry.
Last one, Sean, for me, you were talking about the issue of asset management there.
Yes.
Asset management, I think they need to differentiate whether movable or immovable. I think they are correct in terms of movable asset, like your laptops, everything, because it has to be barcoded, and then a certain system to manage those assets then exist within supply chain. But you've got immovable asset, which is governed by GIAMA, it's Government Immovable Asset Management Act of 2007. That one has got a separate unit or a program in my department which manages immovable asset under a different act. And so if you are saying asset management, then you need to unpack it and be clear which one are you referring to. I agree with Sanel on the previous points that he was making. Maybe to stretch even further, just to come up with the functions and the duties, of the head now, who will be responsible at a provincial level to head or to lead that office of sort of like a mini office of the chief procurement officer. Because right now the CFO has to comply most of the time with the functions of finance and all of those things. So whenever there are issues around supply chain, then those are different matters that most of the time takes time to be explained to the CFO. So just to give it some life and explain it even further. Thank you so much, Sean.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Mudisi. Let's jump to, is Henry still with us?
Yeah, I'm still
Hi, Henry. Any thoughts on IT?
IT, yeah. So just if you can go to 24, 25. Okay, 24, right. Okay, so I mean, we understand the intent for having a single platform. I mean, so we understand the benefits, but I think the practicality of that is problematic for me. Firstly, from a capability perspective, in terms of, I mean, we just know how long it's been taking just to kind of get going with the IFMS. as an example, but also because of the differences between different institutions to have a single platform. So what I would suggest here in terms of single platform, so that's fine, but where they talk about all procurement related services, maybe instead of saying all procurement, rather than say procurement related services that are, and then that are common across the different sectors, you know, and that might address that. So that is just one of the suggestions we've got on that. 20, yeah, so then 2024-2 B, standardized and operable through instructions. That sounds quite draconian. If you look at 2022-2B, 24-2B, in accordance with an instruction, very draconian. So maybe what we should just we should just say used by procuring institutions according to their readiness, and just stop there, and delete determined in accordance with instruction out of there.
So they
on C,
they will tell you when you're ready, and they'll issue an instruction and say you are ready now. Standardize and operate.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Okay.
And on C, maybe we should just include here the appropriate uniform procurement procedures, because I mean, yeah, so appropriate before uniform, just appropriate uniform procedures might work better there. And lastly, if you look at 24-2E, they talk about a marketplace. I mean, they're not even sure what, you know, they haven't defined marketplace, etc. So maybe what we should just have there is provide an architecture, like you mentioned something similar previously, to provide an architecture that facilitates marketplaces. Provide an architecture that facilitates marketplaces might work better there, as opposed to saying a marketplace. And then later on we can yeah, so to facilitate an architecture, let's close this thing here. Right, across all public procurement sectors. Also, I'm not sure, I'm questioning on 25 to 1, sorry, 25 to A, they're saying that they would determine 25 to A, determine requirements for that system that we're talking about by instruction. I don't know how, I question the effectiveness of doing it by instruction, but yeah, so haven't suggested anything yet there, but I do have a problem with that, yeah, to determine requirements by instruction.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So that was just some of the things that I want to pick up on the technology part.
Any comments, everybody? Some thoughts from Henry? Good.
Sorry, let me just
comments. Oh, pretty. There was someone else who might still be with us. I'm not sure if she is. Checking. Hey, Sanele.
Thanks, Sean. Because we are rushing against time, I'll continue to deposit these comments. There is one of the points that was made by the bill. Trying to locate this point because I jotted it somewhere, where it says, if a provincial treasury, just 1 second, let me locate this point quickly. Yeah, it's this point to make. Okay. Yeah, it's chapter 2, section 6.4. if a provincial treasury is of the view that the procurement policy applied by a procuring institution, which is a municipality or municipal entity in its province, does not comply with a provision of this act, provincial treasury may, after consultation with the Public Procurement Office, review such policy and advise the institution. So, if my reading is correct on this one, I think the provincial treasuries are being, relegated to also a post office. I think there should be a position where we also affording the provincial treasuries and an allowance of them to discharge their duties. First of all, they are capable of dealing with matters. And two, I don't think the wording is correct here if saying only if in the municipalities or municipal entities. Is the document indicating that treasuries will now only be focusing on these two elements or these two level of institutions, which are municipalities or municipal entities? And if they would want to prescribe a document, would then they have to, speak or liaise with the institution, which is National Treasury or what you call the PPO. I don't think it will work. I mean, there's a lot that the provincial treasuries are doing in supporting of the institutions. But for them to liaise with the PPO as and when they see a gap in the policy will not work. As much as they will liaise with the PPO as and when they need some guidance, but it shouldn't be something that is, cast in stone, where every time they see a gap in the policy of the municipality, they must liaise with the PPO. I think that's obviously is a concern, Sean, that I want to put forward to the colleagues.
Good. Thank you, Senele. Let's jump to Advocate Nsuluba.
Thank you, Sean. I would want to take you back to the clause that you were in where you had the hosting. Just want to raise a matter that a bit concerns me. Again, going back to the consultation with relevant organs of state. I don't see a situation where the Public Procurement Office can deal with all these matters outside the consideration of the information regulator, precisely because there is a requirement in terms of any form of database, in terms of lawful processing of information. And I don't see that provision being visible here. And it's strange that at this day and age, we are still not capturing the importance of lawful processing of information, which has a security feature in it. Because those 8 principles have got a responsibility to make sure then that whatever data you've captured, you will secure it. Besides the provision to say you won't further process it, you will consult the owners, and the owners are natural persons or entities. That is glaringly absent. The last one, again on this section, when you talk about hosting, the debate about hosting cannot be outside the existing prescripts, which are putting a burden on whoever wants to host any personal information. And I think the consultation with the relevant organs of state, one of which being the information regulator, because there are strict requirements now in terms of what hosting means in the light of all the data breaches that are taking place. I just wanted to raise the glaring absence of that in this section. Thanks.
Thank you. Folk, it's 2 hours, it's over 2 hours. We have done a lot of work on this. There is literally there is exactly 3 business days left to make a submission.